We have just the remainder of this week to look at some of the amazing things in this 12-chapter book before we have to move on and look at Ezekiel, which is much longer. I did pass out a handout. Thank you, Jude, for helping hand that out. And this maybe will help us discuss question 6 on your question list. And you can take that with you and study it further to help us understand some of the second half of Daniel that we probably know a lot less than we know the first half of the book of Daniel. All right. So last week we touched on just question 1. And question 1 I broke into 5 parts, so that took most of our study last week. But we were talking about the major parts of the book of Daniel that we're probably most familiar with. The stories of great faith in Babylon. And so stories like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, Daniel in the lion's den, those stories show us that even though a person may be far from home, far from God, and maybe God appears to be down and out because his enemies have destroyed the place where he made his name to dwell, that he can still provide for his children. That those who are faithful to God are still going to be secure if they put their trust in him. And so we know those great stories, and hopefully our faith is built up by them. I think that's one of the major reasons why the book of Daniel is given to the children of Israel, to help them see that God is powerful. Question 2, I wanted you to notice some of these themes, and hopefully in your study of the book of Daniel, I hope you had a chance to read it cover to cover, 12 chapters. And some of these themes we haven't talked about, of course, but should kind of pop out at you. Let's read in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel's praise to God. Of course, he and his friends pray to the Lord for an answer to the great challenge of Nebuchadnezzar to both reveal the dream and then explain the dream, to basically have divine knowledge of what was going on in another man's head. And God provided that. Verse 19, Daniel 2:19, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And so I may have mentioned this as a prayer, but this is more of a praise. Daniel said, verse 20, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. For wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now, you have made known to me what was requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. What themes of the book do you see right there in this statement of praise to God? April?
God is in control of all things.
God's in control. Yeah, this obviously isn't the only place in the book of Daniel that is shown. It's a recurring theme through the book that God is in control. And maybe like I alluded to as we were getting started, why might God's people be questioning that idea? Why might they need to be reminded that God is in control? Jesse?
They're currently in captivity.
They're in captivity, far from home. And of course, when Daniel is deported in that first deportation, Jerusalem still stands. But a few years later, another group of exiles come with Ezekiel and the other craftsmen. And then a few years later, they're going to hear Jerusalem is in ruins and the temple is destroyed. And so, is God really in control? Or do the heathen nations rule the world? So yeah, this prayer encapsulates a theme that's throughout the book, that no, God is in control. Do you see any other themes here?
Wisdom.
Wisdom? Okay. And where's wisdom come from? comes from God. So Daniel's going to emphasize that repeatedly. Similar to Joseph when he's in Egypt, when he's interpreting dreams, he emphasizes that there's a God in heaven who can make the dream's meaning known to you. And Daniel's going to use that exact same language, as chapter 5, King Belshazzar, who doesn't even know Daniel, but the queen says, hey, there's a man who knows how to do this right here in your own kingdom. He can interpret the writing on the wall. He then calls Daniel in and he says, are you that Daniel from Judah who can do these things? And Daniel says, there's a God in heaven who can do it. It's not me who can interpret dreams, but I serve a God who can. And so, the wisdom comes from God. And so the book of Daniel we've looked at a lot of prophets this quarter, and not all prophets are future telling, right? A lot of prophets are simply, I shouldn't say simply, they're revealing the will of God and his judgment on the people, just speaking for God. But when we typically think of prophecy, this is more like what Daniel's going to do. He's going to tell you what's going to happen before it happens in a remarkable way, a way that makes the critics of this book, people who are atheists, believe that it could not have been written by Daniel. This could not have been written in 600 BC because it just says way too much about people who lived centuries later. No one could know that. Is that true? No one could know that? True, unless that God who is in heaven, who reveals mysteries, made it known to them. So it's a remarkable book for that reason. Any other thoughts you had on question 2 on themes of the book?
Statement that connects to all, pretty much what you were just saying, but he reveals deep and secret things, and that's just almost throughout the rest of the book when you get to 2 and 4 and 5 and all the visions from 6 to 12.
Yeah.
Deep and secret things are being made known well in advance, and sometimes.
That's right. And sometimes they're a little difficult to understand. Daniel struggled with it. He would, as things are revealed to him, he's asking questions like, I'd like to know more about this. And he may be given a little bit more information from the angel, but certain things are just to be understood later. Just reveal what I've given to you, to the people. All right. So question 3, staying in chapter 2 for a moment. Chapter 2, we have this image that Daniel reveals. Nebuchadnezzar asks them to tell him his dream, and his dream is about a statue. And that statue gives, as Daniel describes the detail, I'll admit, I get a little focused on the materials of the statue, and sometimes I forget the event that happens in the vision, right? There's 4 materials, from gold to silver to bronze to iron, and iron mixed with clay. But this is, I've got a few images I pulled down off the internet, which there's pros and cons to every image. But this one emphasizes the major event was this stone. The stone that was cut out without hands that comes and it strikes the feet of the statue and it crushes the statue. And then what happens? What was that? It falls down, it's crushed, it's gone. But what happens to that stone?
It forms in a kingdom that will live forever, be established forever.
Yes, that's the interpretation. But in the image, don't miss the image. What is it, Norm?
It grows into a mountain that fills the entire earth.
It grows into a mountain. And that's the event, right? First, it's setting the stage, here's this statue. And then the event is a stone comes, crushes that statue, and grows into a mountain. And it's explained there in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44, a key verse in our Old Testaments surrounding the kingdom. And let's read that together. Daniel 2:44. He's just described these 4 kingdoms. And then before I read verse 44, let's just notice that there are 4 kingdoms. I noticed after using this image for a few years, I noticed there's false doctrine on this image, and it's pretty faint, especially maybe from where you're sitting, but they're showing a little white image depicting the nations that are represented. There's one by the head. Who's the golden head? That's Babylon. Then the chests and arms are silver. What's that represent? The Medo-Persians. Then the bronze thighs are Greece. And then the iron and the iron mixed with clay are Rome. But you notice there's a fifth one down here. And that's the image for the British American Empire. Because premillennialists see 5 kingdoms in this chapter. But I want you to notice how that's not biblical at all. They're trying to change the meaning and the interpretation of Daniel chapter 2 to include our future, that this kingdom is yet to be set up. And so they're saying, hey, it's in the days of these kings, these British American Empire kings, which I don't quite know how you could interpret today's landscape as the British American Empire, but I get it. But notice how in the text, verse 38, you are the head of gold. Verse 39, after you there will rise another kingdom. So we're on 2, inferior to you. That's the Medo-Persians. And another third kingdom of bronze. So it's enumerating them. It's up to 3. And then verse 40, then there will be a 4th kingdom. It gives the number 4. And then it describes that kingdom in a lot of detail. It says, it will be a divided kingdom, verse 41. And it talks about the iron and the clay and how they're mixed. And it's describing it in verse 33 that these things don't adhere well together. How does that depict the Roman Empire fairly well? Norm?
The Roman Empire was predicated on the Roman legions and their placement. They would technically let you do your own thing as long as you paid tribute and taxes, and if you didn't, the legions would come in and kill you and go away with plunder and then do it again. Hey, just, all right, behave. And it just created a lot of provinces that were troublesome throughout the rest of their empire once they got out of and created a huge thing.
Not very well assimilated, right? They weren't one people, the Romans. They were a lot of peoples that were cobbled together by the Roman might, the might of the Roman army, military, which is very well described here as the iron material, the strength. And so this is a description of Rome, and we know later it splits into the eastern and the western, and very brittle. And so, this is a description of 4 kingdoms. You can't find a 5th one here just because the last one happens to have these specific attributes shown. And we'll see the same thing in chapter 7. And so chapter 2 and verse 44, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. How does that help us understand now what God has been promising ever since the days of Abraham? How is this verse kind of key to it? If you're living 600 BC, what do you now understand that God's doing, Randy?
It gives us the time.
It gives us the time, yeah. He's forecasting 4 empires into the future. It's 600 BC, and who could know anything about a world empire that's 600 years away without having the mind of God? And he's saying it's in the days of those kings. And so when we get to our New Testament, there's very much a mood of expectation among the Jews that something's coming, that these are the days that God said he would fulfill his promise. And so I asked you to connect this idea. Here we're talking about a kingdom. That's maybe the other detail. Where had God also talked about an eternal king coming? Do you remember who he prophesied an eternal king and an eternal kingdom to? He's been talking about that since the days of David, right? David wanted to build a house for God, and God said, no, I'm going to build a house for you. and that house is going to be eternal, and your son is going to be sit on a throne eternally. And so now we get a little more detail that God's going to set up this kingdom, and he's going to set it up in the days of Rome. So what are some connections to our New Testament that helps us see that that's the fulfillment, that it's fulfilled in the New Testament, this prophecy of Daniel? What'd you get? Jesse?
I mean, when you got John the immerser that comes on the scene,
Mm-hmm.
Matthew 3:2, for example, he begins preaching, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And also Matthew 4:17, when Jesus begins his public preaching ministry, he preaches the same message, repent for the kingdom of heaven's at hand. So you get all this kingdom preaching, especially with Jesus. Matthew 4, I think later before the Sermon on the Mount, it says he's going into all the cities, villages, and synagogues preaching the gospel of the kingdom. So, yeah, there's this expectation, and John and Jesus are feeding it, rightly so, because it's coming, it's near.
Yeah. You know, the gospel, of course, we know that means good news. When I think of good news, I guess the first thing I think about that's the good news is our sins can be forgiven. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. But he very plainly says there in Matthew 4:23, he goes about preaching the gospel of the kingdom. The kingdom is the good news that the kingdom of God is coming down to earth. And it's going to fill the whole earth, apparently, like a mountain that fills the whole earth. And so that's why you have this Sermon on the Mount where and so many of Jesus' teachings where he's saying the kingdom of heaven is like. And he's teaching about the kingdom, and the expectation was for an earthly kingdom, and it turns out to be a spiritual kingdom, and it does fill the whole earth. Wherever the seed goes, it can be planted in a heart, and there can be a member of the kingdom who grows from that seed. And so, yes, it does certainly help our understanding. There's lots of other passages we could look at in the New Testament, but of course, Jesus says he was going to build something. What was he going to build? I'll build my church. And there in that text in Matthew 16 through 18, he says, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom. And so he's equating the church to the kingdom there. So, yeah, somebody is going to carve out a stone without hands and turn it into a mountain. That's God doing it. It says God's going to build a kingdom. And that was Christ building his church. So don't forget that this powerful image of the kingdom is the description of this church that you're a part of. It's not weak, it's not small. It has great power, it fills the whole earth, and you're a citizen and member of it. That should encourage us, because we may feel very similar to these exiles at times, where it seems like maybe God doesn't have any power. Maybe nobody wants to hear the gospel, but no, he does. Any other thoughts on question 3? So question 4, let's talk about Nebuchadnezzar a little bit. I'm fascinated by King Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel seems to have had quite a relationship with this king, right? He enters his court in his teenage years, and he's there until the end of Babylon. So, interesting chronology note, when Daniel's in the lion's den, is he a young man? No. Who's the king when he's in the lion's den? Darius, right? Darius the Mede. And so Babylon is gone. The Medo-Persian Empire has started. So he's been in Babylon at least how many years? 70, right? Because he was one of the first deportees. And so he's, if he was 15 plus 70 years, he's 85 years old in the lion's den. Not a young man, a man of faith. And so he has this relationship with Nebuchadnezzar. And I just want you to notice the arc of how God reveals himself to King Nebuchadnezzar. What were some of the lessons that God taught to Nebuchadnezzar through those 3 encounters? The first one is the story we've been talking about with the dream. What do we see as Nebuchadnezzar's takeaway from that amazing miracle that he got to witness, that someone else could read his mind. Jesse?
So, that God reveals dreams and their interpretations, that God protects and delivers his faithful servant, and God is the Most High and rules in heaven and does according to his will.
Okay, and he's looking there at the end of Daniel chapter 2. And yes, so he's recognizing that Daniel's God is a pretty powerful God. He can reveal mysteries. Does he convert to following God and God alone?
Eventually.
Yeah, you do see quite a climax there in chapter 4. But at this point, how do we know that he does not? Because of chapter 3. He had a dream about a statue, and then he builds a statue of himself. And it's all gold, right? Because he's the head of gold. So I think, that registered with him. It might have affected his pride. He was already a proud man, and, I'm the head of gold. Let's make a statue all of gold of me. And so, yeah, he's learning about God. He's impressed by God, similar to, maybe quite different from Pharaoh in the Exodus time frame, where he was seeing miracles and wonders of God, but it hardened his heart. With Nebuchadnezzar, you see a bit of a softening of his heart as these events take place. What about the next episode, where he's now witnessing 3 young men and a 4th man in the fiery furnace? If you flip over to chapter 3, look at his reaction there. What's it do for his faith?
He saw 4 images in the fire.
Saw 4 in the fire. How did he describe the 4th?
Son of God.
Yeah. Some translations say looks like the Son of God. That's pretty specific. I don't know that he would know much about the Son of God. And so other translations word it a son of the gods. Both are possible ways to translate that. Probably more likely that he sees this looks like an angel. This looks like a being from God. And so we don't know if it was the Son of God, Jesus himself, here as he certainly seems to appear a few times throughout the Old Testament story, or just simply an angel of God protecting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So what's this do for Nebuchadnezzar's faith?
Well, he praises God. He realizes that God is powerful, very powerful. I think he begins to realize, that God is the God of heaven.
Yes. Anything else stand out, Norm?
This is not a God you trifle with. This is a God that will save his own, especially if you put him first. And in doing so, this is the power he's willing to expend for those who put him first. And which is why he makes the declaration, don't anybody ever insult this, or I'm just going to rip your existence from the earth.
He's a pretty hot-headed man, and no pun intended there. The way he describes what will happen to people if they don't bow down to this idol, he then turns all that fury on anyone who will insult the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But yes, he recognizes verse 28, Daniel 3:28, that God has delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command. So what's he recognize about himself and his commands? They're lower than this God's commands. So you put your trust in this God, and I have no power over you anymore. I can make whatever commands I want to make, and they're not going to make a difference. And so, and then he talks about verse 29, his decree about those who speak against their God. But then he says, there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. So he's learning something about God compared to the other gods, and he worships a lot of gods. But there's no other God who can do this. So knowledge of God goes up another level. And then you have chapter 4. What do you notice if you're looking at chapter 4, verse 1? What's unique about this chapter? This fourth event, this story of where Nebuchadnezzar is humbled. Who's speaking?
It's from Nebuchadnezzar's point of view.
Yeah, that's right. It's Nebuchadnezzar writing a chapter of God's Word. It's his chapter. He writes it. Of course, Daniel may be the one writing it down for him. He's dictating it, but now it's what Nebuchadnezzar has concluded at the end of his life. So this is very much the climax of his faithful journey. And so what does he learn from this experience? He has another dream. Sometimes I forget about that part because I jump right to the story where he's humbled. But he has this dream about what?
The tree that's cut down.
This time it's a tree that's cut down. And some specifics are given in this great event where the tree is cut down. He's now very concerned. This feels like bad news. Wants to get some feedback from Daniel. Of course, Daniel can interpret anything. He's got such great confidence. You also see the arc, if you want to look in more detail about the arc of how much he trusts Daniel and his relationship with Daniel by this point. But he gets the input, and Daniel is sad to tell him that this is bad news for you, that you're going to be humbled. If you don't recognize that God is the Most High God who rules over the realm of mankind. And so when Nebuchadnezzar then, he's humbled by the dream, but then forgets, becomes proud, and God does humble him. And this is one of the images, the only one I could find where he's not naked. We don't want to put pictures of naked men up on the screen. But he's cast out to live with the beasts. And his mind is changed to where he's got the mind of a beast. His hair grows, his nails grow. And it says for a time, it says 7 periods of time would pass over him before his knowledge is restored. What does he conclude after this experience when he does receive his kingdom back? Clarissa?
Verse 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble.
Yeah. He's able to humble those who walk in pride. Anything else stand out to you from Daniel 4? There's a lot more we could say there, but let me move on for sake of time. Chapter 5, you've got Belshazzar, who's calls Nebuchadnezzar his father, but according to history, he's more of a grandfather. And he's now the last ruler of Babylon. Co-regency with his father Nabonidus, which fits very well with the text because when he offers Daniel all he can offer him, he offers him third position in the kingdom, meaning that he's probably number 2. But it's this foolish king who is partying on the night that Persia conquers Babylon. And so we're probably familiar with this ghost story in the Bible where there's this ghastly apparition of a hand that writes on the wall, and it's terrifying. How did it impact Belshazzar? His knees were knocked. It's a very comedic. It reminds me of a lot of cartoons, right? Where he's terrified so much by this, and nobody knows what it says, and they need Daniel to come in and interpret that writing. What's the interpretation that Daniel gives? Briefly, Jesse. Oh, sorry. You look like you wanted to answer.
I was just going to say you're in really big trouble, and it's tonight.
That's right. That's the short version. Mene, tekel, upharsin, which means you've been weighed, numbered, and divided. And so you've been, weighed and found wanting. You've been, your kingdom's been numbered and found deficient, and it's going to be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And he dies that night. So what did he fail to learn from Nebuchadnezzar's experiences?
To honor the real God and to be humble.
Yeah. Do you notice verse 22, Daniel 5:22? Daniel tells him, reminds him of this story about how Nebuchadnezzar was sent out to eat grass like an ox and then was given his kingdom back. And he says, verse 22, "Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this." And so pride can easily creep back in. Even though we learn certain lessons that should humble us, we can easily get puffed up once again. We always need to remember humility. How does this whole story illustrate Nebuchadnezzar's final message? Clarissa had noted chapter 4, verse 37, he is able to humble those who walk in pride. Belshazzar's pride led him to party on the night that his kingdom was about to fall, which is pretty foolish. But even going farther, let's get the vessels out that we took from the God of heaven. And let's just, rub his face in it. That we're great, that our gods are great, and this God is nothing. That's pretty foolish. And God is able to humble those who walk in pride. And so he terrifies him with this vision, and then he's destroyed that night, and the beginning of the Persian Empire comes. So many of these things are also seen in secular history as well, and align just perfectly with what is told to us here from the first-hand experience of Daniel. So let's talk about the latter part of the book a little bit before we run out of time today. I put a small table here on your worksheet. I wanted you to see how Daniel 7 aligns with Daniel chapter 2, and you start to get an even better understanding of the four kingdoms that are described there. And so your handout gives you some of that. Those four kingdoms we listed were Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Now, what about these beasts, and how do those beasts help us understand a little bit more about those kingdoms? So the first image, pulling some more photos down from the internet of depictions, and you can throw these things into your AI tools and make even cooler images these days. Pretty interesting. But these are some human-made drawings. So this is the image of which kingdom? The first one would be Babylon. So this is kind of the aftermath. It starts as a lion with eagle's wings. But then don't miss the detail that those wings are plucked out. That lion is made to rise up on 2 feet, and he's given the mind of a man. Sound familiar? Sounds kind of like what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. So he starts very royal, very kingly, very majestic. Combining an eagle with a lion, that's kind of the two most majestic creatures I can think of. But then that majesty is taken away because he was proud. But then he's restored in a different kind of majesty. He's given the mind of a man, and we know that his mind was now actually humbled. It was a more humble man than he was to begin with. Then you have another beast that comes on the scene, and it is this bear. What does it say about the bear? Raised on one side.
There's 3 ribs in his mouth.
Yeah.
He's told to eat much flesh.
Told to devour much flesh. So we know because of the sequence that this is the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And so you see some attributes that make some sense to us, maybe some that don't. When he's told to devour much flesh, that's the idea of conquer, right? You're going to be conquering the world. There's different theories on what the 3 ribs represent, maybe 3 major kingdoms that Persia does conquer and absorb. But the raised up on one side kind of shows the imbalance. You'll see a similar image over in chapter 8, also of the Medes and Persians, where it's a ram that has 2 horns, but one of the horns is bigger than the other horn. And so that's a good description of Medo-Persia, right? It's got 2 parts, but eventually it's just known as what? Persia, right? Because the Medes are going to have much less of an impact on the future. Persia becomes the dominant force in that two-part nation. The third beast is a leopard. It's got wings, 4 wings, and it's got 4 heads. So what kingdom does this align with? This is Greece. And so what do you learn about Greece just from the way it's described here? It's got 4 heads. That's going to be a lot of confusion when you got 4 heads. And that's very good. It aligns very well with what we know about Greece because it was divided up after Alexander died into its 4 kingdoms, 4 provinces that were separate, essentially separate kingdoms. But the leopard with wings, what do you see there? Norm? Super fast, right? Leopards are fast. Then you give them 4 wings and they're going to be a whole lot faster. And that's an excellent description of how the Greek conquest occurred, where Alexander the Great conquers the world in just a few years. And then you see this 4th beast. What kind of a beast is it? Huh? Yeah, he doesn't have an animal to assign to this beast. It's just a dreadful, terrifying beast. Here's one guy's drawing, kind of like a rhino. It's definitely got horns, so I've seen it drawn more like a triceratops or something like that. But it's just a dreadful, terrifying beast. And what do we learn about this beast? What do we learn about Rome, which we know this beast represents?
Very strong, arrogant kingdom.
Strong, arrogant. Where do we see the arrogance in the vision?
Iron teeth.
Sure, yeah, it's certainly designed to devour, and we know the Roman Empire did that, exerting its will anywhere it went. But the arrogance is shown in this little horn that grows. It displaces 3 other horns, and the horns represent kings. But this horn has a face, it's got a mouth, and it's uttering great boasts. And so this is probably depicting one or maybe multiple of the Caesars, right, who become very arrogant, even taking on divine titles, claiming to be gods themselves. And so they're boasting against the God of heaven, killing Christians with no regard for God at all. And so it aligns very well with chapter 2, right, where you've got these 4 kingdoms, but described in a lot more detail. So which one of these is Daniel's focus? The 4th one. He wants to know more about that 4th one. He's pretty terrified of it. And so God does give him some more information. Now, let's look at question 7 before we run out of time. In the context of this vision, he sees these 4 beasts come out of the sea, one after another, all pretty terrifying, getting more and more terrified of these beasts. And then what appears next? In Daniel 7, about verse 9 or so. I should have mentioned in my question the 2 things that arrive next on the scene, right? The first is the Ancient of Days. Pretty fascinating image that I found of this one, and I think it depicts what's described by Daniel well. Remember, Daniel's seeing a vision, and he's trying to describe it in words. And yeah, we get a mental picture, but this is what's described, this majestic figure, the Ancient of Days. What are some of the attributes of the Ancient of Days that stand out?
His garments were white as snow, and his hair and the head was pure wool.
What does white usually symbolize?
I'm sorry.
What does white, the color white, symbolize?
Purity.
Yeah, that's why a bride wears white on her wedding day, right? And so he's pure. Not only pure, but white hair also shows age, right? He's the ancient one. What else?
Throne was a fiery flame, filled the burning fire.
Fire is pretty terrifying, powerful, destructive. And it's flowing out of his throne. There's a river of fire flowing out of his throne. And then what's before him?
Thousands and thousands.
Thousands of thousands, myriads upon myriads. So he's surrounded by perhaps worshipers, perhaps servants. It's called the court. And it says the court sat. Oh, and it says thrones were set up. That's one thing this picture kind of brought to my mind, or helped me understand, was there's thrones, plural, verse 9. And he's on one of those thrones. Interesting that there's another throne next to him at his right hand. Seems to fit our concept of Christ, who sat down at the right hand of God after he was glorified. And it says the court sat and the books were opened. And so I like how the image has these pedestals for these huge books at the right hand and left hand of God. And we see that imagery over in Revelation as well. But who's then the next figure? So the Ancient of Days, he kind of interrupted. This description of the Ancient of Days is interrupted. Verse 11, they keep hearing these boastful words. Coming from who?
Horn of the beast.
Yeah, it's coming from this dreadful beast's horn that's uttering great boasts. But then who's presented? Verse 13 and 14, you have the Son of Man. Let's just read 13 and 14. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Does that sound familiar? We had already looked at the end of chapter 2 and the 4 materials on the statue, a kingdom that would never be destroyed. But now, after seeing these 4 beasts that come from the sea, what do you have? The king.
You have the Son of Man.
Right? You have a son of man. What does that image show? He's not a beast, right? He's been showing beasts, and where do those beasts come from? The sea, this kind of earthly origin. But then this Son of Man is in stark contrast. He looks like a man. This one image that I pulled down, of course, drawing from imagery of Jesus, and we see the obvious connections. But this Son of Man isn't coming from the sea. He's coming on the clouds of heaven, and he's presented before God. So he's contrasted in that way against the beasts. His source is quite different. He's presented before the Ancient of Days, and he is given dominion. He's given a kingdom, and that kingdom that will never be destroyed. And so you have in these 2 visions the 2 parts of this great messianic prophecy that God's going to establish a kingdom, and now we get to see who the king is. The king is this Son of Man. Somebody who looks like a man, but is worthy of all these things. Glory, honor, dominion. Why would any human be worthy of such things? Well, that's the question. And you get to learn as you go through the rest of history what type of a man would deserve this type of glory. And we know as Christians that this is the Son of God. This is Jesus. Fascinating that Jesus uses this title, Son of Man, more than any other title for himself. And when we first see, when we hear Jesus call himself Son of Man, what might you first think he's using that title to imply?
His humanity.
Humanity, humility, that I'm maybe just like you. If he's using it to refer to Daniel chapter 7, then what does it imply?
I would have dominion.
It's not a very humble title, and of course Jesus is meek and gentle, don't get me wrong, but he is claiming a title of majesty and power. And if you have time to look at Mark 14:62 or John 5:25 through 27, he says the Son of Man is going to judge, that he is going to judge them because he is the Son of Man. All right, that's all the time we have for today. We'll jump into our Ezekiel lesson next week. And I did email that out last night. I'll print some this morning, so you'll have that lesson in your hands for the entire week. Thanks, everyone.